So welcome to the ACE Annual Performance Reporting webinar. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to be going through lots of information in regards to your annual performance report. I encourage you to ask questions as we go along. If you will pop those in the chat box as we're going through, we'll address them at various breaks throughout. So if any question pops up, just pop it there and we will address it. If you are not sure where the chat box is, take a peek down at the bottom of your screen and you should see a little talk bubble in the menu. If you click that, it should open up the chat box over on the side so that you can enter in any of those questions that you might have as we go throughout. All right. And I see definitely folks are finding it. If you are having trouble with mic or audio, feel free to put that in the chat box as well. And Dave, our producer, can give you some assistance with getting that fixed as well. And remember, worst case scenario, we will be recording and you can always watch the recording later. All right, let's go ahead and get ourselves disclaimed for the day. This presentation was produced under U.S. Department of Education contract number GS00F115CA with Synergy Enterprises, Inc. The views expressed herein do not necessarily represent the positions or policies of the U.S. Department of Education. No official endorsement by the U.S. Department of Education of any product, commodity, service, or enterprise mentioned herein is intended or should be inferred. All right, now that you're officially disclaimed, I think I've met most of you virtually. I'm Sarah Brightwell. I lead the OIE Technical Assistance team. And then also with us today is Bianca Williams, your program officer. As we go throughout our time today, we're going to really break down your APR into each of its individual parts. We're going to look at the cover sheet, then the executive summary, and then we'll go through parts A, B, and C. But why do you do your APR? So in EDGAR, it discusses how recipients of multi-year discretionary grants, which is what you have your ACE grant, it's a discretionary grant and it's for 5 years. So you're required to submit an annual performance report that's going to demonstrate substantial progress. Now that is your key word of the day. You're going to hear substantial progress repeatedly today, and you're going to hear substantial progress repeatedly throughout those 5 years of your grant. So just let it be ingrained, maybe put it on a t-shirt that you can wear during APR season, because substantial progress is key. You want to show that you're making substantial progress toward meeting your approved project objectives. When they're reviewing your APR, and they're analyzing your data, Ed is looking for substantial progress in order to process your continuation award. So it's really key that we use this APR to highlight that. I like to think of the APR as the highlight reel for this year of your grant. This is your chance to really show off what you've been able to accomplish throughout this first portion of your first project year, and so on and so forth through the rest of your reporting periods. So really look at ways that you can show what you've been able to accomplish. Now, when you're doing this reporting, you will get to do that in the G5 system. Now, all of your APRs will be submitted in G5, which means you need working access to G5. This is the time to figure that out and fix it. So I encourage all of you, literally when you get done with the webinar today, go make sure that you can get into G5. If you can't, this is the perfect time to try to fix that. Waiting until the day your APR is due to figure out you can't get into APR is not the time to try to fix that, because it's not going to get fixed in time and you're not going to be able to get in and your report's going to be late. Keep in mind that only your project director of record is going to be able to do the reporting in G5. Now we'll talk about today ways that you as a team should be working together to put together the information necessary for your reporting. But when it comes down to actually accessing the reporting in G5 and submitting it, only your project director is going to be able to do that. So if you happen to have a G5 account for whatever reason and you don't see it there, it's potentially because you're not listed as your project's project director. That's part of why we've been reaching out over the last 2 months, verifying the contact information for everybody and who's your project director and who's your authorized representative, is to make sure that you're in a good place to be able to successfully do your reporting. Now, if you look at this and you realize we have the wrong person down as project director, or I can't get into G5, I don't know what's wrong. Niftily, there is this help desk right here. Keep in mind that it is open, as you see, from 8 to 6 Eastern time, Monday through Friday. You'll see there is a toll-free number, and there's also an email address where you can reach out. And so they can help you with any of those things where your G5 account is maybe not functioning in the way it is supposed to work. Now, if it's a matter of you need to change who's listed as project director, remember, you will need to do that through Bianca by submitting a letter signed by your authorized representative. That letter will need to indicate who the new project director will be, what percentage of their time will be spent on this project, their address, email address, and phone number. And then we'll also need to attach their resume. So you'll send that into Bianca for approval. G5 won't be able to change your project director for you. You have to go through Bianca for that. But anything else, you can go through the help desk. I see here someone's asking for the link to G5. And thank you, Nate. You're right there. It's the g5.gov. And then we'll also send out that link in our follow-up email, so you have a direct link over there. All right. The next piece is thinking about your reporting forms. Now, you're going to be reporting in G5, which already has these forms in it, but it can be helpful to see them in advance. You're going to be using the Ed 524B forms. Those are the official forms for your annual performance reporting and your final performance reporting. It includes those parts that we talked about at the top of the time: the cover sheet, the executive summary, and sections A, B, and C. You can access that there at that link on the slide. Don't feel like you have to frantically write down that link. That will be, we're going to provide you with this slide deck, this recording, and then also that link separately in the follow-up email so that you can click there. But remember also, conveniently, your project planner that we brought up and shared with you through the project planning and reporting webinars are also set up exactly like the Ed 524B form. So if you're utilizing that project planner, you'll be able to easily cut and paste from your project planner into these forms in G5, really cutting down on some of the frustration of the system. So let's look at our timeline this spring for reporting. Technically, your APR application became available March 1st. Some of you may have noticed, some of you may have not. It's okay either way, but it's already available in G5. And you should have gotten a little notification in G5 that it's available. We're having your APR webinar today, March 8th, and then your report is not due until May 3rd at 4:30. So that gives you a good 2 months to complete your reporting. Let me stress though, if you wait until May 3rd to submit your APR, you will probably not be very happy. You're not the only ones submitting APRs on May 3rd. All the ACE grantees are trying to submit their APRs that day. All the NYCP grantees, all the NOLAD grantees, as well as any number of other Department of Ed grants are trying to do it that same day. Undoubtedly, in my experience, G5 slows way down on the due date because there's so many people trying to access the system. So if you wait until 4:15 on May 3rd and start trying to get all your info in, there are not great odds that you're going to get everything uploaded and submitted in time, because the system is not going to be working at its normal speed. And you'll notice that that deadline goes out to the seconds. It says 4, 30, and 0 seconds. That means it's a computer system. At 4, 30, and 20 seconds, that system closes. And so if that's when you hit submit, it's not going to take it because it's now past the deadline. And just because the system has slowed down, it doesn't extend that deadline. So it's really important to plan ahead and submit that report ideally prior to the deadline so that you're not having to stress yourself with a really slow G5 system on the actual deadline. Another thing to keep in mind is that G5 has certain times that it is down for maintenance. If you look back when you first go into G5 here, notice how it tells you like on Sundays that it's unavailable from 3 p.m. to midnight. So if you thought Monday, May 3rd is your deadline, oh, I'll go in on Sunday and knock it out. Well, most of Sunday, it's down for maintenance. So keep in mind, and anything like this will be updated on the G5 site as far as when they plan to do any maintenance and have the system down. So just a good thing to keep in mind so that you're not adding extra stress to yourself during reporting. So the question came in, how much prior to deadline can a report be submitted? So you can submit your report as early as you have the information available, but you'll see on the next slide what time period you're going to be reporting about. So you definitely wouldn't be able to submit your information prior to the reporting period closing because you wouldn't have all your data. But just as soon as you're able, you know, if you're able to submit it 2 weeks early because you just have all your data together and you've gotten it all wrapped up, that's fine. That's not a problem at all. So that brings us to our cover sheet, and that will bring up our reporting period as well. So this is the first part of your reporting is the APR cover sheet. This is required for every single grantee. You're going to complete the entire thing, but there are a couple of pieces of it that I really want to draw your attention to make sure that you know exactly what's supposed to go in those specific spots because they do have some kind of specific answers. So the first thing is this PR award number area. Make sure that you're using the PR award number from this specific grant. Double check it. And the reason I say this is that I have seen a few folks who have sent in emails or who have completed the survey, you know, when you join and register in Zoom and it asks you what's your grantee, who have put in their PR numbers. And when I look up that PR number, it's not a PR number. So you may be missing a digit. You may have just kind of transcribed it a little off. So I would just say, go back and just double check that you've got the correct PR award number for your current ACE grant. All right. The second piece is here under your reporting period. Your reporting period for this annual performance report is October 1st, 2020 to March 31st, 2021. So it's from the beginning of October to the end of March. So that goes back to Karen's question about, you know, how soon could you submit? Well, you couldn't submit prior to the end of March because you're still supposed to report on everything that's happening through the end of March. Now, we always get the question, well, how is this supposed to represent my whole first year if I'm reporting through the end of March? That's because we know that's what your reporting period is. So you're going to talk about everything that's happened the first 6 months of your grant, and then you'll update with more information next time you do your reporting. So everybody who's reading your report understands what your reporting period is. It's just important that you use that reporting period as well. Now, let's go down to 8, your budget information. So this is specific to your ACE grant funds. When it asks 8A previous grant period, this is your first year of having the ACE grant. You might have had other grants before. That doesn't count. There's no previous grant period for your ACE grant, so 8A should be blank. 8B is your current budget period. So you're going to report your expenditures from October 1st to March 31st. Now keep in mind this little caveat here for number 8. These amounts should reflect what you've actually spent, obligated, and drawn down. So that should match what's in G5. So for 8B, we want to know how much money has been drawn down from G5 by the last day of March. Now, a couple of tips on that. You need to make sure that you have a great working relationship with your fiscal office. And in particular, whoever in your fiscal office does your drawdowns should be your best friend, because you're going to be needing information from them regularly. You need to know when drawdowns are happening and how much those drawdowns are for. In an ideal situation, you would be able to request G5 view-only access. Now, what that means, and you'll want to be sure and explain this to your fiscal office as well, because when you tell your fiscal office, I want to be able to see the budget information in G5, most offices freak out a little because they don't want you to accidentally draw down money. But view-only access means that you could go into G5 and just see when drawdowns happen and how much they happen for. You would have no ability to make any changes. You would have no ability to make any drawdowns. It's just as it says, view-only access. But it makes it really easy for you that when you need to report or when you need to be keeping track of finances for your grant, that you can easily just pop into G5 and see that information. If you don't have that view-only access and you would like it, feel free to reach out to us at the OIETA team and we can walk you through the steps you would need to go through to get that. But it is something that is available to any of you, but you would have to have your authorizing representative sign off on it. And like I said, really explain to your fiscal office what it is, because that's usually the hiccup, is some concern about what you would have access to. But that really helps then when you need to report exactly how much has been drawn down. All right, back into 8. So 8C is your entire project period. That's for final performance reports only. That does not apply to you. Leave it blank. So to recap on 8, A and C will be blank. B is the only one that you're going to enter a number into. Okay. Then we go down to number 9. 9 is your indirect cost information. Some of you are claiming indirect cost, some of you are not. If you are not claiming indirect cost, please mark no, move on with your day. If you are claiming indirect cost, then you're going to mark the appropriate choice out of B through E. So you'll mark yes on A, and then mark your appropriate choice under B through E and enter your rate. This is also a great time to check and make sure that the most current indirect cost documentation has been turned in to Bianca. So if you've had a new indirect cost change before the next reporting period, before you turn in this May 3rd report, it's a good time to then submit that documentation to Bianca. Then we come down to 10. Everyone should be checking not applicable. And for 11, everyone should be checking yes. This is asking about your data privacy and security measures. The easiest way to meet this requirement is just include a copy of your data privacy statement from your school district or your organization. Typically, these are listed in like your student handbook or your staff handbook, showing your data privacy policies for your school district or your organization. All right, let's go to the back of the cover sheet because it's a 2-page document. So make sure you do both pages. So as we come on the back, you'll see performance measure status. If you're going to be able to report all of your data in this report, then great, mark yes, move on. Most of us won't have all of our data to be able to report by the end of March. So most of us will be marking no, and then come to this little part right here and mark when the data will be available. So some examples of this. Maybe you have some objectives regarding academic achievement of your students where you're using an end of year benchmark. Well, typically end of year benchmarks aren't given until April or May. You're only reporting through the end of March. So you would just mark no. Not all of your data is going to be available. Maybe you know that, okay, the end of year benchmarks given in May. We usually get the results by end of June. So I would have that data by July. So you could put in by the end of July, and that's fine. But it is really important to make sure and either mark yes that you have all your data right now, or no, which again is perfectly acceptable, but make sure to include when you would have complete data available. Quick question from the chat box.
Sarah,
I
just wanted to say that a good date, because they will be required to submit that information in next year's APR, would be like a May 1st or May 3rd, 2022 would be when all that information would be submitted. We're not going to go back to check for information again. You guys are only required to submit one report each year. So I would recommend just putting in next year's APR date, because that will satisfy that answer. You know, you'll be submitting the completed information next year in the APR.
Yeah. And I'll have, Olani, if you would pop in the chat box that date of May 3rd, 2022 as a great date to put in for when that data would be available, because you'd be reporting it on your next APR. Yep. Now, the one caveat I'm going to give you just as a personal tip, don't then just set it aside and not get it ready until you go to report again next year. You will have slept way too many times since then, and you won't remember all that information. And by that, I mean, not only the quantitative information, because you might have that in a file somewhere, but all that qualitative information that goes around with it. So I would set yourself a calendar reminder, make yourself an appointment on your own calendar that maybe in August or July, you get all that information together. I would suggest popping it in your planner, because then it's in a nice, easy to access spot, so that then when you go to report next spring, 2022, you're not having to hearken back in your memory to spring 2021. Because that's a long time to think back if you haven't gone ahead and documented that for yourself. So that would be my little tip there. We do have a question in the chat box as far as on, and I'll pop back so you can see, on number 11, that data privacy, and asking, can they just attach that to the cover signature sheet when uploading? Yes, you can just upload it as one big document, and that's completely fine. And then we'll pop over to this last part of the second sheet, which is your authorized representative signature. Now, your organization's authorized representative must sign the cover sheet. You can then scan it, take a picture of it, whatever you need to do, and upload it into G5. A couple of tips on this part. It will upload best as a PDF. For some reason, G5 just cooperates better with PDF documents versus Word documents or JPEGs. So I would highly suggest make it a PDF and then upload that. You'll probably have more success. If it still is giving you fits and won't upload it, then your backup plan is that you can email it to Bianca. But definitely try to upload it into the system first. Don't just go straight to the email option, because it really is preferable to have it all there in the G5 system so your report's complete. But just know that that is an available backup plan. Now there's a question in the chat box, is the authorized rep the project director? No. Your authorized rep, you may also think of them as your certifying official. In some places they're called your certifying official, and in some places they're called your authorized rep. If you're not sure who that person is, feel free to reach out. We can let you know who's listed on your project as your authorizing rep. A lot of times it's like a tribal chairperson or a superintendent. Sometimes it's the head of a fiscal office. But definitely you'll want to determine who that is in advance, because very often when you start thinking about those folks, they tend to be people that are a little harder to get a hold of to get signatures. So again, you don't want to be right up against your reporting deadline and having to chase someone down for a signature. So as soon as you have the information available for your cover sheet, I encourage you to go ahead and complete it and get them to sign it so that you're not having to worry with it later. And John, yes, you'll take this cover sheet and resave it once it has that signature. Like I said, you can scan the cover sheet, you could take a picture of it, whatever's easier for you, and then save it as a new PDF and upload that PDF. All right, so that is your cover sheet. Your next piece is your executive summary. So your executive summary is an entirely narrative portion. It does have a 2-page maximum. Now, when I say 2-page maximum, I know some folks start writing and they're like, I just have too much. I have too much and it exceeds 2 pages. There is another place in your APR for the rest of that great information. You want your executive summary to be the more concise 2-page high-level overview of what's gone on in your project for the first 6 months, which for most of you has been planning period. You want to talk about what you've been able to achieve, the progress you've been able to make, talk about any challenges you've encountered. Maybe you've had to change your plan some based on a challenge that came up or due to COVID. This is where you're going to talk about those parts so that if someone read that executive summary, they would have a nice, concise 2-page overview of what's gone on in the first 6 months of your project. And then I'll show you in a little bit where you can put that additional information that you have, because there's definitely other places where you can go into more detail. All right. And then Clarence, will a digital signature be okay? And I'm going to let Bianca take that one.
I was just replying in the chat, but yes, you can use the digital signature. Just make sure that that is okay with your policies, and it's okay with ours.
Perfect. Oh, and I do see one last question on this executive summary. Can we use bullets? Absolutely. Yeah, when you're writing your executive summary, you can put bullets in there, however you want to set that up. No problem. All right, so now that you've done your cover sheet and you've done your executive summary, we're going to move into Section A. Section A is really the bulk of your reporting. This is the most important part. Not that the other parts aren't important, but this is where you're going to be able to really illustrate what's going on in your program. So this is what the form looks like. This is specifically what it looks like if you download it from the Ed 524B website. A couple of things to keep in mind with any of these forms. Notice up in this top corner where it says expiration 7/31/2021. If you've had an OIE grant before or any grant before through the department and you've been using these reporting forms, don't use your old forms. Most likely the forms you have expired because most of the forms that you had expired back in August. So you want to make sure that you're using the new forms. Now, granted, you're going to be copying and pasting into G5 and ideally doing that from your project planner, which is set up just like this form, into G5. So you won't have to worry about the expiration, but if for some reason you need to actually submit the paper forms, please keep in mind that they do expire and you want to make sure you have the most up-to-date one. So as we think about how we're going to complete this, we really want to talk through how you can complete this to make sure it's accurate, that it's meeting all the requirements for reporting, and that it's doing a great job of highlighting your program. So you're going to be reporting on two different types of measures, GEPRA and project. GEPRA measures are the same for everybody. It's the 8 measures, and we'll review them, that every single one of you have to report on. Project measures are the project objectives that you've set specific to what you're doing in your project. And for those that have already had their first project planning coaching call, we've been working through getting those objectives ready for reporting. And for those who have it upcoming, we'll be doing that. But that's really the big difference. GEPRA are the same for everybody. Project are specific to what's going on in your individual program. But it also changes how you're going to report on them. So for GEPRA measures, you are only reporting the actual performance ratio. So what I mean by that is under measure type, you'll write GEPRA. These little gold X's, you don't need to put X's in your reporting. This is just my way to show you, don't write anything in those boxes. Leave them blank. Literally, the only box you're going to write in is the ratio box under actual performance data. GEPRA measures do not have targets. They only have actual performance data. Okay. Now you'll notice the G5 system will automatically create a percentage for you, and that's fine, but you're only entering this red, your actual performance ratio. Now for your project objectives, for those you're going to write PROJ. That's your code there for project. And these are a little bit different because you're going to write two things. Still only ratios. The only thing we ever write are ratios. And you're going to write a target ratio. So that's your goal. And we'll go over some more examples of what this looks like. But your target ratio, and then your actual achievement ratio. So your actual performance data. Again, G5 will create some percentages for you. All you need to worry with, though, are inputting the two ratios. If you do that, you're set. All right, now we'll talk through the next couple of parts, and then we'll do some examples. So the GEPRA measures are what really help OIE and the department see the progress of not just your project, but the grant program as a whole. Because since all 40 ACE grantees are reporting on those GEPRA measures, it allows that overarching look of the entire ACE program. I want to talk about what you're going to be reporting as far as time period. So for GEPRA, those 8 measures that are the same for everybody, you're only going to be doing this current implementation period. And when I say implementation period, that has to do with reporting. I know some of you are in planning, some of you are in implementation, but everybody's reporting on GEPRA October 1st to March 31st. For your project objectives, you're going to be reporting 2 bits of data. Your baseline, which would be where you started out prior to ACE being implemented, and then your current, the October 1st to March 31st. So GEPRA just gets 1 year of information, the current year, whereas your project objectives get 2, your baseline and your current. And remember, we'll look at some examples too, because I always think examples make things a little clearer. The other thing I want to remind you on as far as this quantitative part is if you have data that are unavailable, but will be available, it will actually exist, but it just doesn't right now, then you put 999. You put it in that ratio box, but you just type 999. 999 is a code so that when OIE looks at your report, they'll know that data will exist, but I didn't have it as of the reporting. Now, conversely, if that data will never exist and it just is not a thing that's going to exist for year one, then you would report a 0, because it's not a matter of the data not being available. It's that there is no data. Okay. So it's a 999 versus a 0, depending upon if that data will become available. So for example, if it's a matter of it's an academic objective, and like I said, you're doing your benchmark in May, so you're going to have that data once you complete that assessment. Great, put 999 because you'll be able to update that later. If it's a matter of an objective pertaining to a specific service, let's say a counseling service you were going to offer, but you're not starting that counseling service until year 2, well, you're never going to have information about that counseling service for year 1 because you hadn't implemented it yet. So then you're going to put a 0 because that's not data that will even exist for year 1. Most of you are in a planning year. Some of you are in a planning period of anywhere from 3 to 6 to 9, 10 months. And some of you have a full calendar year of planning. So know that we're aware that some of these things are going to be 0 for you this year. And that's just by token of the way this grant is designed and the fact that you're in a planning period. Don't think that that's going to reflect poorly on you, that during a planning period, you don't have a student outcome for something. It's impossible, and that's okay. It would be a dilemma if it was year 2 when you're supposed to be implementing and you're like, I have no student outcomes, I'm sorry. Then yes, red flag dilemma. But if you're in a planning period, we know you're not going to have student outcomes for anything, and that's okay. And for some of you, it might be just not yet, because maybe you only have a certain amount of planning period, a certain part of implementation. So it is going to vary for each of you. Remember, as you're going through this, when you have questions, please reach out and ask. We would much, much rather have those conversations with you, answer those questions, and help you through this process now than have you submit information that might not be accurate or might need to be changed later. So please, please ask all your questions. All right, so that's the quantitative part. But then you get down to that part at the bottom, the explanation of progress. And I'm actually going to go back because I just want to make sure you saw where that is. See down here where it says explanation. Oop, doesn't help if I then click it too fast. Explanation of progress down at the bottom. So for it to fit on the slide, you don't see, but there's plenty of room. That is a whole narrative area. So what do we want and need in that narrative area? That is your spot to give all the details behind your quantitative data. Quantitative data is great, but it only gives a portion of the picture. This is your chance to paint the whole rest of that picture. Give the context to the numbers. Talk about how you've maybe met that particular goal or made progress toward it. If you haven't yet met it, why? What types of challenges might you have encountered? What have you done to work around that challenge or to meet that challenge? How have you adapted your program or your process? Talk about how you collected that data. When was that data collected? How did you analyze it? What activities in your program supported that outcome? So what are you doing that caused that? If data is not available, again, that's going to definitely be a reality for most of us for some things this first year, but it's important to still talk through what is available. So maybe you don't have that student academic achievement data because you don't have kids in services yet. But if you've been working to put together your plan for what you're going to use to measure academic achievement, and you've been putting together maybe data sharing agreements with your local school district, then you've been working on that one. And that's all great information to put in there, even though it's not the quantitative part that goes at the top. It's all that other stuff that you've been doing that relates to it. Include all that information. It's really important when you're writing your explanation of progress. This is not where we want you to be super brief. When we see A one-sentence explanation of progress, that's concerning. Be robust in your descriptions. This is your chance to really give the rest of the information that just can't be told purely through one number. All right, and the other piece of that is, that's the other thing that's really helpful to plan out if you're using the project planner. That box will expand for you. That way you can have spell check and all of those nice things prior to then cutting and pasting it into your planner. Great question. So Penny was asking, since we're entering ratios, do we want 999 over 999? No, you're just going to put 999, and I'll show you in the example as well. But yeah, very good question. You're just going to put just 999. There is a character limit for the explanation of progress. I do not have that on me right this second, but I will make sure and include it when I send out the slide deck, because there is a character limit on there. It's not a particular word or page limit, it's by character. And that's one of the other things you can do if you're writing it in that planner. If you just click that cell, you can hit character count and it'll tell you how many are in there. All right, let's look at some examples because I think that can be really helpful. So we'll start looking at your GEPRA measures and how you're going to report on those. I talked about there are 8 GEPRA measures. All of you have to report all 8 measures. Even if you have to report a 0 because it doesn't apply yet because you're in your planning, that doesn't mean you can skip one of them. You have to include all 8. So let's look quickly at each of them and kind of thinking through. So number of options, the total number of options from which participating students can choose. So this is looking at how many service options are you offering up to students? Grand total. And that's actually one of the examples we'll look at and how to report on that. The second one is the number of culturally relevant options. So let's say that you're offering 10 options currently for students to choose from, and maybe 6 are culturally relevant. That's what you would report for number 2. Again, if you're in a planning year, it's going to be 0 options because you're not offering services yet, and 0 that are culturally relevant. And that's okay because you're in your planning year. Number 3 is meeting educational outcomes. So for this one, you're going to actually look at your project objectives, and whichever of your project objectives are related to educational outcomes. Maybe you have 2, maybe you have 10. You're going to look at however many objectives there are that are related to educational outcomes. And here you'll put how many of those you met. So let's say you had those 10 educational outcomes and you met 7 of them. So you would report that 7 out of 10 here. Number 4 is the number of students served by your program this year. So again, if you're in a planning year, you've served 0 students in the first year. That's okay because you're in planning. If you're in implementation, there should be a number. Number 5, the number and variety of options that met needs. So you'll notice that for 5 and 6, this is referring to your parent feedback. So if you're doing that through a survey, a focus group, however you plan on doing that, that's where you'll be reporting whether the number and variety of service options that you're offering are meeting the needs of the students according to their families, and whether the quality of the options meet the students' needs. So you'll be able to report that based on how many families actually complete that survey and are happy with that. Then for 7 and 8, this has to do with parent requests. So as part of the ACE program, you have to have a process in place to be able to allow families to request services. Now, you don't have to honor every single one of their requests. If they request something and it's not within the scope of your project or an allowable activity, or if they request something and it would be inordinately expensive and not within your grant budget, it's going to be okay if you're not able to meet that, but you have to have a process in place to take in those requests. So for 7, you're going to be reporting how long did it take you to respond to those requests, whether it was telling them yes, no, maybe. How long does that take? And then for number 8, out of all the requests that you got this year, how many actually caused you to add a new service option? So you'll see none of these are going to be feasible to report on if you're in a planning period. That's okay. If you're in an implementation period, you will need to report on these. All right. Now let's look at how that will actually look in action. So this is an example of how you would report on 2 different GEPRA. Okay, so you have the total number of options from which participating students can choose, and the percentage of parents who report that they're happy with the number and variety of options. So we've got those in there as just 2 example GEPRA. You'll notice that I indicated year 1. That just really helps then, particularly when you're going back and looking at your past APRs to know what this is for. Make sure that you're indicating here in the measure type that these are GEPRA measures. And I do want to, I'll go back one second because I want to point out, notice I didn't change the wording of these GEPRA measures. You cannot change a single word of that GEPRA measure. Copy it and paste it exactly as it is. Literally, the only thing you can do is add that nice little year 1, year 2, whatever year it is at the end. Other than that, use it as you see it. That's why copy and paste is always the answer. All right, so back to marking it as GEPRA. And then you'll notice literally the only place I've put in any answers is here in the ratio, the actual performance ratio. Because remember, for GEPRA, that's the only thing I'm entering are the actual performance data ratios. So in this one, I'm going to show you 2 different ways you can do that. So like for the total number of options from which participating students can choose, logically, when you think about that, that's just a whole number. You're offering 5 options, you're offering 15 options, you're offering 7 options. So that's why for this person, they're offering 10 options. It's just 10 over 1. So this basically forces all of us to go back to those last few years of elementary and our fraction work. And any number over 1 is that number. So that's why you put it that way in the ratio. So however many options you're offering over the number 1. And it's going to be that way for any of those GEPRA that really are just reporting a whole number. You just put that over a 1. Whereas when we think about the ones like the percentage of parents who report that something's happening, okay, that one we can report as a ratio. So if you're trying to report a percentage, then like 77 over 100 gives us 77%. So basically whatever your percentage of parents who agreed with that over 100 is going to give you the appropriate percentage. So that's how you're going to do those GEPRA in the 2 different ways that you're going to be able to do that. All right, so I do want to quickly go into the 2 questions here. So during a planning year, how many items of the 8 are logically a 0, or is it all zeros? It's all zeros if you have a full planning year. If you have just a planning period and you're going to start implementing services in the summer or maybe even in the fall, then you'll have some data, you'll have some students served, that type of thing. But if you have a full planning year, it's going to be all zeros because those are all student outcomes and you won't have any students yet. Yeah. And I know it can feel very uncomfortable to write down that many zeros, but I promise you, we know you're in a planning year and it's okay. And this is recorded. So you have it recorded that I'm saying you're in a planning year and it's okay. And then the other question, what if some of our options aren't available until years 4 or 5 of the grant? That's okay. Your options, your service options are likely going to change across a 5-year grant that's based on the needs of your students and community. So if there are certain options that weren't supposed to be available until later in your project, that's okay. That's not going to be a problem. Do we have to record the 0 in a ratio format? Yes, that is a great point, Mark. If you just put in 0, the system will have a small conniption fit. You're going to have to put 0 over 1. Very good point. And how would we have any data in a 9-month planning year if the report goes through March? So another good question. You probably won't have any data if you have a 9-month planning period. I mean, you may have some project objective data, but you definitely won't have any GEPRA data because you're reporting through the end of March. But if you have a 9-month planning period, that means you have 3 months of this first grant year that you're going to serve students. So by the end of this year, by the end of September, you will have served some students. So you would put a 999 because by the end of September, you would have data. So that's kind of the big distinction is if you're going to serve kids by the end of September, then you're going to be using a lot of 999s because you're going to have some data, but you don't have it yet. If you're doing a full planning year and so you won't serve any kids before the end of September, then you're going to have a lot of zeros because if you're not serving kids, you can't have student outcome data. So Clarence was asking if his implementation starts August 1st, then what would be included in this report? So yeah, it is kind of that same idea. But yeah, if you're starting your services August 1st, as many of you may be, because that's when many of you start back to school, then a lot of yours are going to be 999 because like when it's asking, and we'll actually go back to the GEPRA slide, when we're asking the number of options. Well, as of the end of March, you're not offering any options, but by the end of September, you will. So you would put 999 because you don't know exactly how many options. You can maybe put a good guess on it at this point because you're doing your planning and you know what you're expecting, but you won't truly know how many options you're going to offer until August. So you would put 999, and then that's information that you'll update on your next APR. Same thing for really, as we go through, that's going to be for all of these, that if you start implementing in August, you would at least have some data by the end of September. So you would put that 999, and then you'll update that on your next APR. You're only going to go with that 0 if you're not serving any students before the end of the first grant year. So by the end of September, if you're not serving kids because you're doing a full planning year, then that's going to be a 0. If you're going to start serving kids this summer or beginning of next school year, then you're going to go with that 999. Okay. So the last bit of the reporting on that is this explanation of progress. So like I talked about, you can make that lengthy. This is just a short little sample here, kind of going into whatever might be happening with those particular GEPRA. And then we'll go into your project measures. So we've reported on our GEPRA that everybody has to do. Now, these are your project objectives that are specific to your program. All right, so as you can see here, I've got my first objective. Notice that it's the same in both boxes with the exception of this row is my baseline data. This row is my year 1 data. Because remember, for your project objectives, you have to report your baseline and your year 1. So your before your ACE program existed and this first grant year. So we've got our same one in each one, just denoting the different reporting period. I've marked them as PROJ because they're my project objectives. And then first, you're going to input your target. So you can see from the way that this was written that I'm trying to hit 60%. So my target is 60 out of 100. Your target is going to remain the same throughout. Once you set your target, once you set your objectives in this first APR, that's what you live with for the life of your grant. Next, you're going to go over and do your actual performance. So I'm saying for my fake grantee that baseline before implementing the ACE grant, only 17% of my students were making improvement each year in math. Now you'll notice this year I had to put 999. Now notice it is not a ratio, it is not over 1. You're going to solely type in 999. Okay? So with the 999, that's how you'll write it. And the system will take it in that ratio box as just pure 999. And that's because I'm saying we're going to give a test that I can report on, but we just haven't given it yet. So I'm going to have that data before the end of the grant year, but I don't have it as of the end of March. And so that's okay. And then I include my explanation of progress. And again, this is an abbreviated version because I'm just trying to give you an example on the slide. So keep that in mind. Now let's look at the other option. In this one, this is my next project objective. This one is about reading achievement. Notice again, it's the same in both boxes with the exception of I have a baseline one and a year one. They've both been marked as PROJ. And then I've put in my ratio for both as far as my target. So based on my objective here, I want 70% is my goal. So 70 out of 100 is in each box. For this one, when I look at my actual, my baseline, prior to the implementation of the ACE grant, 12% of my students were making annual progress in reading. You'll notice for this one, I reported 0. So this would be if we're not giving any kind of reading assessment this year, I have no way to be able to report data for this. Here's the key. Do not leave it blank. Blank is never the answer. Blank means incomplete and that you need to then fix your APR. So don't leave it blank. If you're not going to be giving any kind of reading assessment and you have no way to report on this for this project year, it's a 0. Same thing with if you're not serving any students this year because your whole year is a planning period, that's okay. Put a 0. And that's all going to be all right. And then making sure to include, again, your good explanation of progress for that data. All right, so making sure I'm getting to these questions. So I saw, are the examples that are written on the slides going to be there later where we can print them out? Yes. When I send you the slide deck, I'll send it to you as a PDF. So all of these example slides will be in there. And so you can print it out for reference as well as have that recording available. Absolutely. There was also a question about a new page for each objective, even if it's under the same goal. So here's my suggestion on that. Keep in mind that for all your project objectives, you're going to have to be able to fit a baseline and a year one. Now, if you have two objectives that they're addressing similar things, so you feel like one explanation of progress would be appropriate to address both, you can do that. What becomes an issue is if you put all your project objectives on just one page, then you only have one explanation of progress box, and I can guarantee you that's not enough detail. Don't put all your project objectives on just one page and give this tiny explanation of progress that's supposed to address all of this stuff. So for example, and I'll use the GEPRA as an example if we go back. If you wanted to put number of options and number of culturally relevant options on the same page, that would make sense because they're talking about a similar content, and you could probably within one explanation of progress adequately explain why you have this number of options and the certain number that are culturally relevant. So that would be feasible with one page. If you put all your GEPRA on one page, and just did one explanation of progress, that's not enough information. That's not going to work out. Okay. So I would definitely encourage, it's better to break them apart on multiple pages so you have ample room to give your explanation of progress than to try to squish them onto just a couple of pages and not have enough space to truly give that important narrative. So yeah, Karen, because I happen to be familiar with your goals and objectives, you would definitely want to split your objectives for each goal across multiple pages. And if you want to look at how we can do that, if any of you, we can definitely help give you some feedback if you reach out. But yeah, you would definitely need more room than would work out if you have all 5 of those objectives trying to do one explanation of progress. All right. I think that is all our questions on part A. But if you have more, feel free to pop them in the chat box. Like I said, we're here to answer questions, but I'm going to turn it over to Bianca to talk about the ever popular Section B budget.
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you, Sarah. That was great. So right now we're in Section B. Section B is where we're going to, I think we have a slide for it. Go to the next slide. Yeah. So you'll use the section to write the narrative that describes all of your spending that happened between October to the end of March. So this is where you can explain anything, all your expenditures. Also, what's really important to include in this section right here is your drawdown frequency. You know, our best practice is to have a drawdown, at least one drawdown per quarter. But we know that, you know, working in with tribal governments, that sometimes there's like reimbursement that happens from the tribe, or, you know, you might have to submit something. So maybe you're not drawing down quarterly. You would want to explain that, you know, especially if not a lot of drawdowns happen right now. This is your time to explain, you know, well, we're going to pay all our contracts for the summer, so that's why our budget's so big. You know, please, we cannot remember every single program and how their budget operates or their budget system operates. So this is your time to explain it, so we're aware that we are expecting more funds to be used. Sorry if you hear screaming. My son's waking up from a nap. He's okay. So yeah, if you have any unexpected funds remaining in your budget, this is also the time where you would want to start explaining and planning how you would use those funds if you were approved of carryover. So, you know, salary, if you were meant to hire people during the planning period, or, you know, do a survey or do something that ended up being less, or just didn't happen, please have a plan to spend those funds. You want to be as detailed as possible, so we, you know, have a clear picture of your plan, and that plan is still fitting the scope of your project. But please, please, please draw down. You know, if you want to keep your funds, show that you can use your funds. You know, if you're not spending down, that's the number one reason why we have budget cuts. You know, at the end of the fiscal year, if you have a large remaining balance, most of your year funds, if your whole year funds are remaining, you are guaranteed to receive a budget cut. If you cannot spend any, you know, funds this year, why are we giving you money for the next year? And you have, you know, probably even more money if it's an implementation year versus a planning period. So please show us that you can use your funds and spend your funds. We know things happen and COVID and things change, but please have that contingency plan and explain it to us, you know, that we can't do this, so we're going to do this instead. And next slide. Oh, I kind of already talked about this, but yeah, if you're wishing to carry over any unexpended funds, this is now where you can kind of start thinking about it. We're halfway through the year. If you have to plan for summertime, that should be accounted for. But if after summer, you're going to have a lot of these funds left over, please make sure, you're including that into your next year's plan. We want to make sure we're not carrying over large balances each year. So if you do have a carryover balance, make sure that next year that balance will be spent down as well. That will be included in your year two pot of funds. So if you have to increase, activities or, students served to spend all those, or, maybe more trips or more supplies, as long as it's fitting your scope and you have a good plan on it, that's how, you're going to be able to keep some of those funds. Make sure it's consistent with the scope. We don't want to just add a whole new, if your scope is to only increase reading, now we're not going to just say we're going to do art classes because we have extra money. No, we're going to find more reading materials. We're going to find more reading programs, that we can offer. So please make sure we're not just, the community really needs this, but it has nothing to do with your project. It's not going to be allowable. So everything that you want to revise the funds to, make sure it goes back to, what was included in that original application. Next slide. All right, so section C. This section is really important for you all because we're going through the planning period. I know a lot of you guys are thinking maybe this APR during a planning period is pointless because we're in a planning period and your project objectives and GIPR measures have almost nothing, really to do or doesn't show what's going on in your planning period. So this section right here is where you can describe and tell us all of the great things that's going on in your planning period. You're getting information, you're collecting surveys, you've got a lot of feedback from families. Again, the whole purpose of the APR is not just to waste your time. We have to make sure that you're making that substantial progress, like Sarah was saying before. We really have to show that we're giving the funds with our best judgment to great programs and program directors to really utilize the funds for great reasons, So if you're unable to spend the funds, there are many other programs that, we can find that's serving Native kids and or the Treasury and other places, but we can't just keep funding projects that's not doing what the project was intended or just not making progress. So just as much as you guys are accountable for the funds, we're accountable for the funds too. So, we have to make sure that we're making our best judgment and you're showing us that you can utilize these funds. So section C, please use this additional information section to share what you need to share to show that you're making that substantial progress. If it's hiring people, if it's, setting up a website, if it's, getting vendors or getting the contracts together with your service providers. I know you guys are working. Put it on paper, show that we're giving you guys the money and you guys can do something with it. So please utilize this section. Also, you see on here, we're all dealing with COVID. Please make sure, if there's any changes that may have happened, maybe you have to change things because of COVID. Maybe it's more virtual instead of like in-person meetings. You guys are having webinars and so on. This is your space to include that as well too. If there's attachments, anything, this is your extra space. So please, utilize it. Again, show substantial progress. That's the whole point of this APR. We want to make sure that we can keep funding you. And, this is going to be great for the students in your area. Next slide. This one. Okay, so Sarah said it before. Please, please, please submit your reports on time. You guys know I'm so busy. So I do apologize for that, but it is a lot of work to get that funding out the door on time. And we have to get everything in to, really like a month after the reports are due on our end. So I have a month to review and go back to you guys and ask any questions I need or get more information. And a month is almost not enough time. So for you guys to help me out and get funding out the door, please submit it on time. If not early, you have it after March 31st. If you have all your information, submit it in April. You do not have to wait until May. It will help me out. If some are coming in earlier, I can start reviewing them and getting information if needed. But we do, want to make sure that we can give you guys your funding on time and make those, if we have to have calls to get more information, we just need extra time because, sometimes we're not able to maybe see the project because, information can be missing and we might need some stuff or a signature can be missing and so on. So please make sure, the earlier the better. So the last bullet, that's very important, carryovers are not guaranteed. So, please be persuasive in them. Also, please know what to carry over. You don't want to say you're carrying over things, but then providing the exact same thing in year two that was already planned in year two. There should be an increase in things. There should be, more things added. Please be very, please explain how that carryover will be used. Don't just say we didn't hire people, so we're going to carry over our personnel funds. Well, then don't you have personnel funds in year two? So why will you need personnel year funds from year one if you already have that same personnel in year two? I can't assume that means you're hiring more people or they're going to spend more time or whatever the case may be. You have to tell that to me. I can't make any assumptions for any project. Every single one of your projects are completely different. So please explain as much as possible to receive those carryover funds. And please still show that you can spend the funds. We can't just blame everything on COVID. We can't, just say everything's in the planning period or will come. Please be innovative and, still try to reach those goals that we agreed upon during the planning period or year one implementation period as well. So, you will know if you receive your carryover really closer towards September and October when you receive your new continuation award. So you will receive a GAN. That GAN amount on there will only be your year two funds. Your GAN does not include carryover funds. But once you receive that new GAN, if you did not receive a reduction, then you know that every single thing that you have on the GAN and in G5 is for that year. If you have a large balance in G5 and we determine that you needed a reduction, we do not take the funds out of G5. Everything still stays in there. What we will do is take funds from future payments. So that will be your new award funding. So, if you are unable to spend about $100,000 this year because of personnel and you have no revision or request to change that, your new award will be reduced by $100,000. So that's kind of how you can tell if you received a reduction or, if your carryover is included in your award. Again, we will touch base again in October just to, make sure we're all on the same page on your available funding. But please, please, please try to do as much as you can with the funds you can now. Do not always just determine on having a carryover or no cost extension. We want to, spend currently and not just planning and pushing things off to the future. Next slide. Okay. So one thing too, I know I'm seeing kind of the chat as well. I know with COVID and with planning periods, we're expecting some carryover. Carryover is not a bad thing. The only thing is that we have to make sure that you're still able to do things. We know with grants, everything pretty much costs. So if you're not spending funds down, to us, it doesn't look like you're doing work, which it could be a late reimbursement or, things like that. So that's very important to include in your APR. So please make sure you're able to show and document that. And also, I have no idea how the department's going to handle carryovers this year. I know last year they were pretty flexible with COVID, but we still made budget reductions, so no one's safe. So please, we don't know what's going to happen June when we're making these determinations, but, best thing to do is spend your money and have a plan on how you will spend the remaining money in the following year. So the important reminders is that reporting already opened. Please, you can check into G5. Make sure you see the APR package in there. If you have any questions or concerns, you can reach out to me at Sarah. If it's G5, reach out to the G5 help desk. But, if you need to get access or if there's no project director change, please contact myself so I can make that change and you'll have access to it. I just checked today. I've seen it up in G5, but I have no idea how it looks on your end. So if one of you guys can check and make sure it's there, please do that. Also, submit as early as possible, the better. Like Sarah said, it's automated. So after 4:30, you cannot submit it in G5. You will have to email me your whole report, which could be a little harder, sometimes easier. You can still email it to me if you know G5 has issues with your program. I know grantees do that, but please be mindful of the time. I have to mark all the reports that come in late. Late reporting can affect future funding, so just please be mindful of when you're submitting it, because you will not be able to go in and revise. Next slide. Again, the APR is due May 3rd. I thought May 3rd was a Monday.
May 3rd is a Monday.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So it's Monday, May 3rd, not Friday. And in G5, so we will also, any questions in the forward, we'll definitely try to touch, more on this during our project directors meeting and other talking stick sessions. So, if you have more questions, other people probably have questions too. So we'll, definitely be repetitive and try to answer as many of those questions as we can before this due date. Next slide.
Which brings us to questions. So we did have a question regarding that it was going to be difficult to do carryover projections after just a 6-month planning period.
Well, I think, a lot of it, what you have planned for this year should be your planning period. If your planning period in the 6 months has been delayed or has not started accordingly, or, maybe your budget has been changed and tortured by my request, you might very well know that you may have a carryover or there's funds not to spend. If you think you're on track and there's not no carryover, great. You can, even after the APR is due, if there needs to be budget revisions to spend the funds down, that's awesome. So, that carryover request is really for in the 6 months, are you on time or are you behind? Have things changed completely? I know I've been working with some programs where, they had to kind of redo their whole budget because of the ACE program requirements, so they might very well know that they're not able to spend as much as they intended this year. So every project, again, is completely different. I think it's best to plan to spend for everything and work on revisions. I don't think, if you can do everything this year, great. But some grantees just already know, they're not going to be able to do everything as intended or, spend the funds as intended.
And then the next question was regarding, can I show you in G5 exactly where to find the reports and what it looks like on your end? So I'm not going to be able to do that live in the webinar today, both because of time and because since I'm not a grantee, I can't get into G5 in that way. But what I will do is put together those screenshots and I'll just make it into a separate little piece that you can watch separate from this webinar. So you don't have to watch the whole webinar just to get to that. And I'll send that out to everyone as well, so that if you want kind of a walkthrough of where to find it in G5, you'll have that. If it's not where you think it's supposed to be, if it's not working, G5 can be a little finicky. So it's okay. Reach out, let us know. I'm happy to hop on with you and actually go into G5 and help you find it or figure out if it's just not working. We need to reach out to G5 and get it fixed. So we can definitely do that. There was a question regarding, I had put a tip in the chat box that section C, like most of G5, tends to do better if you just upload one PDF document instead of uploading like a PDF and a JPEG and a Word doc and all these things. If you can put everything you're going to put in there, be that a picture or a link or narrative, if you can put it all in one PDF and upload it, it will upload better. Typically, if you try to upload more than one document, it has a tendency to not work. And John brought up that there is an upload limit in section C. Absolutely. It's a rather large limit. The only time I see people really having trouble with that upload limit is if you put a bajillion pictures. I would try to keep it to 10 pictures. If you have 50 pictures, that's wonderful. Post them up somewhere and include a link to that. Don't try to put 50 pictures in a PDF and upload it to section C. G5 can't handle that. I will share with you the PDF size or the upload limit. Like I said, typically you won't have any issue unless you put way too many pictures in there and it just can't quite handle it. The next question was regarding the recording. Yes. So what we're going to send out, just so you can be expecting it, it will be the recording link. It will be the PDF of the slide deck. It will be the links that we shared. It will be the optional budget reporting form. It will be the file limits. And it will be that little bit of information on how to actually find your reporting package in G5. So we'll follow up with all of that information. That will not be today. That will be tomorrow and toward the end of day tomorrow because of having to do the recording piece. Okay. So don't worry if you don't get it as soon as you turn off this webinar. That is going to be end of day tomorrow when you'll receive that via email. Let's see.
My computer died, but I'm still on. And before my computer closed, I seen Clarence mention something about not receiving the budget final approval. So everyone, this week is finally a normal week, work-wise. No holidays or off or birthdays or anything like that. So I will be in the office all this week. I know I have a couple one-on-ones with some grantees, but I am getting to those final emails. I've been working on clearing it down, and I know it's back to I've replied to some grantees and now I need to reply back again, but I'm there now. So you guys will definitely be hearing from me, getting more approvals. I'm hoping that this round everyone's kind of got their budgets cleaned up and I can approve a lot more is my hope. But if not, we will have some more guidance and some time to work on that before you guys start implementing. But yes, you guys will be receiving, some more confirmations for budgets definitely this week as my schedule is somewhat clear.
All right. Well, that seems to be all the questions in the chat box right now. But if you had another question you were holding on to, go ahead and pop that in because we've still got a couple of minutes for that. But what I do want to do at this point is pop up our normal end of session poll. So if you don't mind fast fingering in an answer to our end of event poll, we would greatly appreciate that. As you're finishing that poll, I'm going to be sharing just a few upcoming events. Just another reminder to have that save the date on your computer for the project director meeting that's going to be April 20th to 22nd, that Tuesday through Thursday, 1 to 6:15 Eastern each day. The registration for that should be coming out the end of this month. So be thinking about who from your team would be the right folks to attend, keeping in mind that you do get 3 invites per grant. So we do ask that project directors attend. That's a required attendance, but then you can invite 2 more folks from your project to attend with you. Other events that we have coming up even sooner in March. Remember, we do have our ongoing distance learning series. We do that every other Tuesday. So tomorrow we'll be doing audio and video recording from 3 to 4:30 Eastern. And then on the 23rd, we'll be doing virtual assessment. So some great webinars coming up in March. Those will continue throughout the spring, every other Tuesday. The other reminder about those distance learning sessions is that they are open to everyone on your team. So that doesn't have to be just your project leadership group. That really is everybody. And then finally, upcoming this week for all of you is our March demo talking stick. So that's for our ACE and NYCP grantees. That's going to be on Thursday from 3 to 4 Eastern. Everyone should already have that calendar invite, but if for some reason you do not, please feel free to either private message me here in the chat or shoot me an email when I share the next slide with our contact information. And that way we can then make sure that you've got the calendar invite for March demo talking stick on Thursday. So to wrap up, I want to make sure you have everybody's contact information. I feel like everybody knows Bianca's email, but just in case you have missed out on that before, there it is for you, as well as the email address for the OIETA team. Remember, we are here to help and support you. If you have questions, whether they're small questions or big questions, feel free to reach out and we can communicate via email, phone, or even set up a Zoom session to work through. If you have not set up yet your project planning coaching session, I encourage you to go ahead and get on the books for that as well. And then I do want to give one little reminder on this piece. So we talk about when you're sending in communication to Bianca or to the OIATA team to make sure include your grantee name and your PR number. I want to clarify what we mean by that because we're getting some kind of varying responses of those. So I want to make sure everyone knows what that is. Your grantee name is the name of the organization that was awarded your grant. So that might be the Yukon-Koyukuk School District. That might be Navajo Nation. That could be any type of entity that was actually awarded the grant. So not necessarily who you work for, but whatever organization was actually awarded the grant. Your PR number is that number that was awarded to your grant. It's on your GAN. If you pull your GAN down, you'll be able to see your PR number. It starts with an S and is a fairly long number. If you can't find it, you're not sure what it is, please reach out. So when we ask for your grantee name, we want that organization name. And when we ask for your PR number, we're looking for that S number. So just a helpful little tip so that you make sure that you are providing the info so that we can best get back to you on things. All right, we are right at time, so I'm going to stop our share. I will take a couple of last questions from the chat box, but I know some of you may need to hop to other events. So thank you for joining us today for our ACE annual performance reporting webinar. And I look forward to seeing all of you on our March demo talking stick on Thursday. And then we'll hit a couple of questions here. So let's see. The project planning coaching session. So that has to do with that webinar that we held 2 weeks ago, looking at how to prepare for the reporting season, looking at your project goals and objectives, and getting all of that situated. I think that may actually be the last question in the chat box. Like I said, if you have any others, I'll stay on for just a few minutes to take any final questions. But thank you so much for joining, and see you Thursday.